Kim, and welcome to Esotouric's podcast, You Can't Eat the Sunshine, for the week of February 16th, 2015. Join us this week as we talk with Bill Martinet, a retired employee of the Sunkist Corporation, about the year he spent working in the gorgeous, now-demolished Sunkist Building opposite LA's Central Library. We'll also visit with Donald Spivack, former Deputy Chief of Operations and Policy at the Los Angeles Community Redevelopment Agency, to learn about the terrible Central Library fire of 1986 and the redevelopment plan that saved the building. So stay tuned.
Can't eat the sunshine, but you can make a beeline for the best of the coastline. La 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 la. Skid Row, Solano Canyon, the Doria, and Pico Union, the long-lost neighborhood called Hermina, between South Pass and Highland Park, Grand Central Park. It is divine. You can't eat the sunshine, but it's a gold mine.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for listening to our podcast, You Can't Eat the Sunshine, for the week of February 16th, 2015. Two guests this week, as always. Well, not always. Next week. Usually. Look forward to that. This week, two guests. Bill Martinet. Bill is a former, longtime Sunkist employee. He is joining us this week, and I'm so excited. We've been waiting months to find a good match for this interview. He will be talking to us about his 1 year working in the old Walker and Ison 1935 Sunkist Building on West 5th Street across from Central Library.
36.
It's 35.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I just edited your copy. It said 36. 1935, Walker and Ison Sunkist Building. Go on, darling.
Okay, Kim. So, this building is gone. 444 South Flower takes 444. When they tore the building down, the CRA redeveloped the corner of 5th and Flower, and the numbering is the 400 block. So this giant 1970s skyscraper takes the place of what was the Sunkist Building and a couple other buildings at the corner of Bunker Hill. It's a really important building. I'm really excited about getting to this interview because everyone's just going to love it. Second interview, Donald Spivack. Donald Spivack is former Deputy Director of Policy and Operations for the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles. He's a long-time guest. He's a repeat customer on this podcast. He's a dear friend. He's a great guy. Can't touch his working knowledge of downtown redevelopment. You can't touch what he knows about his decades of work in downtown for the Community Redevelopment Agency. So, armed with that skill set of his, he is going to talk to us about the building that is across the street from the former Sunkist Building site. He's going to talk to us about the Los Angeles Central Public Library, which is 1926. Bertrand Goodhue. We're going to focus on the later part of this building. We're going to focus on 1982 to 1992. Okay, we're going to talk about the city's plans to remove the Central Library, the fire, the air rights transfer, all this stuff. Get us up to speed on why the library is what it is today. So we're just focusing on the middle of the block on West 5th Street between Grand and Flower. So let's get excited.
So wait, you're talking about the zone of land between John Fonte Square and Ray Bradbury Square.
I was just waiting for you to jump in and mention that. Yes, Kim, that's exactly what we're doing, and that almost sounds like a Tom Waits song somehow.
Lit row.
Yeah, okay. So, Kim, you're the Pishka Maven.
Hey, I am the Pishka Maven. Thank you for remembering. And the Pishka is the digital tip jar. It's associated with this podcast. If you like what we do and you'd like to be supportive of our efforts, you can just use all of the magic of the internet to give us some money, honey. Never obligatory, always appreciated, and if you do, as some of our listeners choose to do, know that everything you contribute will be used for fuel on the road. Gasoline, chili rana burritos, coffee for me, which I need because Richard carries lots of tea, but sometimes a girl needs coffee, and just generally the costs of doing business. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That was very nice. So let's get to closely watched trains. Closely watched train number 1. Kim, you sent me a nice little editorial, nice editorial, nothing little about it, nice editorial in the Daily News last week about Charles Fletcher Lummis's Southwest Museum and the fact that it has now come under the aegis of the National Trust. At this point, the building has been adopted by the National Trust. A lot of long-term goals and objectives are being set. It's very exciting. The museum turns 101 this year. So it's an asset. I'm very excited, and we're just going to see Kim. From what I understand, and we've talked to a number of people about this, it seems like this is just everyone calm down. The cavalry has arrived in some sense, and they're going to do some triage, and again, long-term goals and objectives are coming.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It should never have come to this. I mean, this is what happens when the city completely undervalues their assets. The first museum of the city of Los Angeles was basically handed off to this nascent institution of the Autry Museum of the West, which, was completely inappropriate. Shouldn't have happened. The city needed to maintain ownership and management and stewardship of the Southwest. The result was that this museum over in Griffith Park really didn't have what it took financially or in terms of their desire to maintain this Museum of the American Indians. And so the collection has been, honestly, taken care of beautifully. It's a good thing. What they've done in terms of their investment in the institution is to take all of the basketry and other artifacts out, put them in deep freeze machines to make sure that all creepy crawlers are killed, put them in custom boxes, ship them off-site. The museum hasn't been open in years, and it's been a source of great trouble and strife in the community. Obviously, Highland Park lost a gem when the Southwest shut down, and because it's obvious that the Autry is not ever going to reopen the Southwest in the way that the people in the community and the people in the American Indian community would like to see happen, the Native community, a cry for help has gone out, and now Washington is here, the National Trust is here, and hopefully we can just start from scratch. I think at this point the Autry's ready, willing, and quite able to walk away from this if a solution comes, and maybe the fundraising has to come from somewhere else. I hope in the next couple of years it will be possible for people to simply walk into the Southwest Museum and see this incredible collection in the place that it was built, in the place it was meant to be, and that the Southwest Museum can again be part of the cultural life of this city. Because the Autry, for all of the good work that they do, and Suzanne Lummis, Charles Fletcher Lummis's granddaughter, is one of their chief educators, and she's the best. I haven't seen the Autry in the time that it's been part of the city really changing the conversation about culture and becoming a focal point of the cultural history of the city. And I think the Southwest can. So let's hope this can be fixed.
Occidental College will.
Occidental College will hopefully become the steward of Lummis House down at the bottom of the hill. This is another instance in which the city has completely dropped the ball. The Historical Society, which was there for 60-some years, 50 years, Richard?
61.
61 years, because they were asked to come, even though it was never their mission to run a historical house. The city asked them, please, 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 come and help maintain and interpret this site.
The term white knight, I believe, is commonly used in this narrative.
Sure, and everybody who was involved in that is dead now, and you have to go back and read the archival material to understand how completely disgraceful it is that Reckin Parks has changed the locks, that the Historical Society has had to leave, and that at the moment, Lummis House, one of the most important historical sites in the West, is now under the management, I think you're hearing the question in my voice, a little bit of vocal fry here, under the management of the Recreation and Parks Department of the City of Los Angeles, an entity that has never wanted anything to do with it, that has no understanding of what it is, that does not wish to interpret it. So, LA needs to do a lot better. I think the county does a better job of maintaining these cultural assets, and yet at the same time, everyone is talking about Hollyhock House up on Olive Hill, which has just undergone a multi-year restoration and is about to be reopened. Eric Garcetti? Yeah. What do you say, Eric Garcetti?
I think that was Eric Garcetti's council district, I believe. So
well, sure, but I mean, it's the Recreation and Parks Department and Cultural Affairs, and a lot of entities are involved, and they choose to put their assets and their resources in Los Feliz. I don't get it.
Kim, I think we all know that when council districts decide to play nice with the Department of Parks and Department of Recreation and Parks.
You keep saying Parks and Rec because of that silly TV show. I know.
Because we just saw Nick Offerman, my friend, and that makes me happy.
I know, but it's hard to remember.
So when council districts and Recreation and Parks and the Office of the Mayor all play nice, good things happen to parks. And I want everyone to remember that.
This city is so screwed up. Go and read about what's been going on with the campaign to take over management of the Greek Theater, which has become a battle of two megacorps versus the community, versus the Recreation and Parks Department, versus the City Council. I do not understand why it is so hard to just do things the way they're supposed to be done, but sometimes, you roll the dice and they don't come up exactly as they're supposed to. It's a very, very twisted world we live in. I want to go into Lummis House, and I want to meet an interpreter there who can answer all of my questions. Just generally, as an Angelino, I want to walk into the Southwest Museum and see the collection. And I'm really hoping both those things can happen soon.
Occidental. Look to the west. We're moving on, Kim.
Wait, what's going on with Occidental?
Just look to the west.
Okay, he's not going to tell you. So the reason that the Historical Society is gone is there was an RFP for a new manager to come in and run Lummis House. You may have heard us talk about this in the past. It was one of these crazy LFPs, which was basically looking for a hot dog on a stick vendor, because the Recreation and Parks Department doesn't really understand what Lummis House is. So no one submitted an RFP that suited their needs. Hot dog on a stick did not seek to become the vendor. But Occidental College did come to the Department of Recreation and Parks and say, we're not going to submit this RFP because that doesn't make any sense, but we are willing to submit a proposal for creating an Institute of Western Cultural History that would be focused and located at Lummis House. So these discussions are ongoing, and I think that's, a pretty good solution, and I hope that it can move forward quickly because there are so many people who really care about Lummis House and its place in the West, and I think it's a very interesting proposal and a potentially very good steward, and we all just need to speed up the clock a little bit.
Okay, so Jeremiah Axelrod is going to leave the Autry Museum eating his dust. Okay, no, really. Jeremiah Axelrod is going to put together a absolutely knock him out of the park cultural institute. And the National Trust, this big federal agency, is going to come in and help the Southwest, and the Autry's not going to have. They're just going to be eating dust because they just have not curated good stuff. And I really need them to hear this. They really are going to have a lot to do, even though Occidental should it win this proposal and take over Lummis House. They will have much fewer resources. They will be the ones that will be shining through.
You're mentioning what the Autry may or may not do for the Southwest Museum. I don't think the Autry should be part of the Southwest Museum. I think it's time to decouple. It's clearly a completely different vision. And I don't know who's going to run the Southwest Museum and what the programming is going to be. But that is up to the National Trust to figure out. Maybe it'll become a branch of the Smithsonian.
All right, Kim, Idle Hour in North Hollywood, open. Programmatic architecture.
Take me for a drink, honey. I want to go inside a couple of giant barrels alongside a replica of the old Bulldog Cafe on Washington Boulevard and enjoy a completely brand spanking new programmatic experience. Such a cool thing. So great. You know, we're big advocates of the Tamale on Whittier Boulevard in East LA on the border of, well, it's in East LA, but it's on the Montebello border there. Not a structure that could get $1 million revamp like we've just seen at the Idle Hour, because the Idle Hour is physically a much larger compound.
Yeah.
But I hope that people will look to the Idle Hour, which looks amazing, and we haven't been there yet. We will. You know, we've gone to North Hollywood all that often. I'm sure it's going to be a great success, and I hope it'll inspire people to think about what you can do with these kind of cool, wacky survivors of the 20s and 30s, these programmatic buildings that are built like oddities, built like what they sell. And I'll remind the world out there, if anyone's thinking, tamale, kind of interesting, the Zepp Diner, the Zeppelin-shaped diner that used to be in LA, I saw a great raking photo from the side, and I realized, oh, I always assumed it was like the tamale. It was basically just a small tube about the size of a single train car, but no. It was the frontage of a larger building. And I think that's the solution for the tamale, because, ladies and gentlemen, the tamale is on the market with the house behind it. Wouldn't be cheap, but someone could build an awesome Mexican restaurant where you walk into the tamale and beyond. So think about it. And in the meantime, you might want to go and check out the Idle Hour. It is brand spanking new and shiny, and from photos at least, it looks like a really beautiful restoration.
Kim, the New York Times wrote about Ray Bradbury's house.
Yeah, this notion that LA is suffering a mansionization crisis, something that people in the communities have been talking about for a while, and a lot of small organizations have formed to try to fight this issue. It's actually two issues now. It's not just individual families buying a piece of property, knocking down an old house, and building as close to the property line as they legally can, which in many cases casts shade over their neighbors and results in walls that are so close to a neighbor's property that it actually detracts from the quality of life and makes a neighborhood look really weird and aesthetically jarring. So there's the individuals coming in and building these large homes, which are of the fashion of the day, but I wish they would build them in the Deep Valley, where there are vacant lots. We've also got the problem of the small lot ordinance, which was passed by the city of Los Angeles, and this newish ordinance, has unfortunately put older housing stock in the crosshairs for developers, because especially in neighborhoods where you've got like a house from about 1910, which is on a nice, roomy lot. Used to be, that would be one of the most desirable homes in a lower middle income neighborhood, and people would be lining up to buy it and maybe fix it up a little bit. But now the developers can pay a premium of a third to a half more than it's actually worth as a single family home, because they're legally entitled to take these cool old houses, knock them down, and build up to 6 or 8 townhomes in their place. This has resulted in destruction of historic housing stock. It's resulted in parking crises. It's resulted in great profits for developers, and there are groups forming now to fight this as well. So what happened that brought the attention of the New York Times to this issue in LA, and we're losing a lot of houses. It really has become a crisis, especially in the last few years, was the destruction of Ray Bradbury's home. And this is a case of a single buyer who wanted to have a really good lot on which to have a clean slate. And Richard, do you want to talk a little bit about how this was rushed, even though there are no plans to build anytime soon?
No, we're just going to move on. We've talked about this at length. Okay, we need to move on.
No, but what do you think about it becoming a national issue?
I think that Ken Bernstein has way too much on his plate. I think the head of the Office of Historic Resources is being screwed by the Office of the Mayor. I think their budget is being cut. I think the resources are intentionally being removed from the Office of Historic Resources, and I think that in 5 years, this is really going to become a crisis. So everyone needs to write to Mayor Eric Garcetti, Senate 2018, and tell him to please put more money back into Office of Historic Resources and let them do their job and let them manage the HPOZs much more. Let them start the work they've tasked them to do.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. And it's a disgrace that the Office of Historic Resources is being gutted. And I hear that the libraries are also in the crosshairs of the budget right now. What the heck? Come on, these things are cheap and they're so important. I think it's really kind of neat that when Ray Bradbury's rather modest, unassuming 1936 traditional home in Cheviot Hills gets knocked down, suddenly the New York Times, which has spent the last 100 years making fun of Los Angeles and saying we don't have any architecture or any sense of history, is reporting on the fact that we're losing this really cool architectural history. So thank you, Ray Bradbury, and thanks Tom Maine for knocking down a house people really care about because something important happened there. And now the whole country knows LA actually loves its old buildings, and we're in crisis.
Good. Okay, so we're gonna move on, Kim. I'm gonna quickly point out some upcoming events. This coming weekend is our Lava, the reinstatement of the Lava Sunday Salon. We're at Library Bar. It now starts at 2. Paul Koudnaris is giving his talk about demonic cats. I'm going to keep this short because it's full. It's RSVP only and we're full, so I'm not going to push it because we don't need to. I am going to mention that the month of March 29, at Library Bar, Nathan Marzak, who's Visionary of the Year 2015, will be giving his talk on Richardsonian Romanesque in Los Angeles. We need to follow up with Don Sloper.
I need to order the plaque for his Visionary of the Year award. And by the way, every year when we do a Visionary of the Year, they get a completely different award that is appropriate to the person being honored. And I have to say, Nathan, if you're listening, you have the most deranged award I have ever found. It's vintage, it's weird, I don't understand it, maybe you will, but it's going to have a plaque on it by the time you see it, so stay tuned. And folks, RSVP and come to Nathan's talk. Yeah. If you ever believed that there were fairy castles in Los Angeles, it's true, there were. They knocked them all down except like 2 of them. So come and learn all about it. He's got some great photos and history to share.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim. So that's Sunday, March 29, and we'll be getting April on the book soon. It's going to be Charles Bukowski and Go-Go themed, just as a hint. Okay, in the middle of all these events, Sunday, March 15, is our continuing series of our forensic science seminar workshop at Cal State Los Angeles' Department of Criminalistics, which is in the Hertzberg Davis Forensic Science Center, which is at the campus of Cal State LA. In this facility, the Hertzberg Davis facility is run jointly by the state DOJ, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and the LAPD. It is a working crime lab, and in the western corner, ground floor, is where the Department of Criminalistics is, which is an open part of the building, and that's where we do all the heavy lifting. And we're going to have a talk on forensic ballistics by a firearms inspector, and we're going to have a talk about homicide investigation in the county jail system for gang members. These are going to be great. These are 2 great talks. Super excited, and we're going to keep moving. So we're going to get to the interviews because we have no choice because time passes. Second interviews with Donald. I'll introduce him first. I don't really know how much more I need to introduce Donald Spivack. He's been on. I don't know. He's like he's.
It's his podcast.
It's not his podcast. Oh. Donald Spivack is former Deputy Director of Policy and Operations for the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles. This is a period which spans from the mid-'80s through the closing of the CRAs by Governor Brown. So about 30 years, and the breadth and scope of his working knowledge of downtown development and the forces behind them is fantastic, and I owe him the plan, the silver book. I got to send him the silver book. So we're going to talk about the Central Library. We're going to talk about, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the Central Library from about 1982 to 1992, 10 years that changed Central Library's life. It's across the street. Central Library is across the street from the former location of the Sunkist Building. The Sunkist Building, Walker and Eisen, 1935. Our first interview, which I will get to in about 45 seconds. Our first interview was with Bill Martinet. He worked in the Sunkist Building, which was demolished in 1973.
Are we going to put some photographs?
Yeah.
We're going to have a little set up. You can look at photos, okay?
Yeah.
So you don't just have to listen, you can interact.
Yeah, we're going to put up a photo set, don't worry. So Bill's going to talk about his 1 year of working at the 1935 Walker and Eisen Sunkist Building on West Fifth Street, across the street from Central Library. It's absolutely fantastic. And with that, let's take it away with my interview with Bill. Bill, I'm here with you. We're at M Street Coffee in Sherman Oaks, and I want you to properly introduce yourself because we're going to talk about the old Sunkist Building on West Fifth Street in downtown Los Angeles. And tell us why you're here to talk to us about that.
I'm here to talk about it because I worked down there for maybe 1 year, 1969-70, and have some recollections of the building.
Perfect. And before we get started, just tell us your full name.
William Martinet.
Perfect. And you're a second generation Angelino?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So, Bill, let's start with the building went up in let's just get a little backstory. Let's actually step back. Will you please explain to us what the Sunkist Corporation is?
Well, Sunkist is a cooperative, farmer cooperative. It's owned by the growers of California and Arizona, and it's basically a nonprofit company. And
Okay, great. No, that's fine. Just not everyone knows that. Okay, so in 1936, this growers cooperative, on the heels of many forward-thinking and astute business decisions, they made another really great decision. They decided to build their own building at West 5th Street and Grand. And it went up in 36. Walker and Eisen were the architects, very famous, very important architects. You started there about a year before they demolished it. So why don't we start your narrative with driving to work?
Well, I lived in Sherman Oaks, and it was always a joy to drive my Volkswagen down to Los Angeles. There were carpool lanes in those days. There was actually a freeway, but it was a carpool of three of us in my Volkswagen Bug.
Okay, great. And tell us, I'm sorry, I'll lead you along these questions a little better. You drove down, I want to know where you parked, and I want to know about the different places you parked, because it changed.
Well, there was a parking lot on the corner of Flower and 5th, but that was taken away for development, and so we ended up going up Flower to the brand new Bunker Hill Towers and parking up there. So it was a nice, quarter-mile walk every morning and every evening to get the kinks out of our desk jobs.
Perfect. And so you were parking, just to contextualize this, you're on Bunker Hill in 1970. In 1970, the Bunker Hill Redevelopment Project is in its 10th year, and the hill had been leveled of all the old residential structures. And as you just said, Bunker Hill Tower was being built. That was the first building. The Union Bank Tower was going up. So really tell us what Bunker Hill looked like when you got out of your car and walked across and down to 5th and Grand.
Well, there was a lot of construction going on at the time, and basically it just was a nice walk going to work because it was downhill. But it was uphill coming back. I wandered around that area during my lunch hour and that kind of thing, but there was considerable activity around the building.
Good. All right. We're going to come back to your lunch break in a second, okay? but let's stick to wandering around Bunker Hill itself. Your dad and your uncle did some wandering around old Bunker Hill just maybe a couple years prior to that, as these old Victorian residences were coming down. Do you want to talk about that just briefly?
Well, my uncle was a LAPD officer, and he had the inside knowledge of that the Victorian homes were coming down. So he told my dad that there's an opportunity to pick up some nice furniture at the Bunker Hill development. So they picked up a lot of antique, oak furniture, which I became somewhat of a collector of myself. So
good. All right, let's stick to your lunch break. We're going to stick to wandering around, so we'll get back to the cafeteria in the building. But tell us about Grand Central, because you would walk over there for lunch sometime. Grand Central Market at 3rd and Broadway.
Yes, I was young and energetic in those days, so I did a lot of walking around downtown LA. I actually didn't live downtown LA, but was very curious about it. I grew up in North Hollywood in the burbs, so I was very curious in those days to wander over to Grand Central Market, because my mother would go down there on occasions to buy. We would take the red car down there when I was a child, so I would go over there and have lunch at the various ethnic booths and just kind of liven up my day. I actually also walked over to the produce terminal over on the other side of downtown LA, because that's the business that Sunkist is involved in.
Yeah.
So we would. That was a little bit of more of a walk, but then we'd go over there and meet with the buyers and see the action that was going on at the produce exchange there. So, and I believe that's where the Sunkist office was originally, in that general area.
I'll figure this out. Thank you. That's good. Let's get back to the building and let's start at the top, sticking to the lunch theme. We're going to now start to talk about this beautiful Walker & Ison concrete pile. Tell us about the cafeteria at the top of this great setback structure, which is 7 stories high, right? Correct. Okay.
Yeah, the building was 7 stories high, and it had a cafeteria at the top, which we would go to. We had our break in the morning and a break in the afternoon, and then a lunch. But you could actually walk out on the patio there and look around downtown LA from 7 stories up. In those days, that was pretty high. So we had a good time up there. There was actually an executive lounge that I had the opportunity of going in once in a while. So if I wasn't interested in the cafeteria, which excellent food at the time, I would go out and take my morning, lunch walk.
Perfect. Okay, so let's. I'm going to describe this building a little bit more before we go in the front entrance. Okay, so this is classic modern structure. 7 stories, central tower, which houses elevators, probably some of the basic ventilation. I'm not going to say air conditioning because I don't think they had air conditioning, but basic ventilation, elevators in this wonderful tower, series of setbacks. It's a modern building. You've got a very strong horizontal and vertical elements to it. A lot of really great detail, which I'll get into in another podcast with someone else. But I want you to take us from 5th Street. Was there still a grade on West 5th Street when the building was built, or did they take the grade? Yeah. So tell us, because people are standing in front of the library. They come out the library, they're on 5th Street, and now all they see are Lawrence Halpern's Bunker Hill steps. And what was there was this building, the Sunkist Tower. So tell us what that was like, what you would have seen if you were standing in front of the Central Library, and then we'll just walk in and we'll go back into the elevators.
Well, the Sunkist building was on a slope, and going downhill towards Flower.
To the west.
To the west. And actually, the building was somewhat of a challenge to. I'm looking at the parking. There was some parking in there, but it was a very narrow entrance to the parking, which was primarily the executive team would go in that. They actually had a gas petrol station for the executives, but nevertheless, going in the first floor, it was a long, narrow, somewhat like a hallway, but there were two receptionists there with the elevator in the back, with the elevator operator, two elevators, and of course there were stairways on both sides of the building, which you can use if you were energetic. I'm not really sure. I think the second or third floor was the boardroom, which was quite large for our board. We always had just about around 25 to 30 board directors, so it was a pretty good.
That's a good sized board.
Yeah,
that's a good sized board.
So it wasn't. We had to accommodate that large group, and also the growers were basically invited to any of the meetings. So there was an audience area. It was actually like a small theater, if you will. But do
you want to, just while we're in the second floor office conference room, do you want to talk about the murals?
Well, the second floor, I want to say, had maybe the print shop and some of the business services things like the mail room, the print shop, and because printing was a big thing back in those days. And I want to say that the board must have been on the third floor. The boardroom must have been on the third
floor. So will you tell us about the murals on the third floor boardroom, which left with Sunkist when the building was demolished and moved to what it's soon to be former location now, even in Sherman Oaks?
Yeah, well, there were very large murals. I want to say at least 12 feet high, and they went the length of the room, so they had to actually cut it in sections, I think, and so that they can move it out. But those murals again, added to the need to have a large boardroom. So, but they were pictures of the groves and the harvesting that was going on in the locations. Primarily Orange County at those days and Ventura County.
Perfect. Let's. I don't want to forget the elevator operators, but we'll save that till our discussion of the building shutting down. But I won't forget them. Let's just spend a little more time. I notice that on each wing, the building has two wings: production on one wing, and distribution on production, distribution. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the different parts of the building? We've talked about the second floor, the third floor. Just tell us about how distribution and production were sort of broken up and where they were.
Okay, well, the company was was the largest co-op for citrus in those days. So it was like 80% of the industry at the time. But it provided many services for the growers, including production, which dealt with the grower relations, and we also had to have contracts with the growers. And we had quality control, which we called the field department. And we also had at that time we called the pest control department, which dealt with the farm advisors and entomologists. Was all in that I want to say field services division, which was the production area. And then the distribution, basically in those days they called it the traffic department, and they tried to move the product out of the packing houses into the marketplace, which was very closely aligned with the sales department. And those two, sales and traffic or transportation, were on the fourth floor together, and the field services division, as I mentioned, was on the fifth floor, and then we had advertising and executive offices on the sixth floor. So I think the seventh floor was the cafeteria and fruit grower supply company.
Hold off on the fruit grower supply. Good. But you've demarcated our last turn, so good. We're going to look ahead to that. Before we move on to the fruit growers supply company, do you want to talk just for a minute about printing? Because I assume there was printing of the labels there, the famous fruit labels. Maybe not. Okay, we'll move on. Don't worry. I'll ask David Boulay.
Maybe.
Okay, I'll ask Dave. Don't worry. Okay, so we have two things to get through. We have to get through this sister company you just mentioned, and we can't forget the elevator operators. Okay, so you were there in 1970. By 71, it's over. A.C. Martin is contracted to build a new headquarters in Sherman Oaks, which has now been abandoned just recently. It's about to be left completely. 1971, the building we're talking about is gone, demolished by the same company that built it. Tell us what happened to the elevator operators.
Well, the elevator operators were then out of a job basically when they moved to Sherman Oaks, and so they became the mail room clerks, doing the delivery throughout the new building with their carts to the various departments. So, that was kind of a sad thing, but it was a good thing. It was multitasking, elevator operators.
They were probably happy to be out of the elevators after all those decades.
Well, that's for sure. They were wearing business suits and they're sitting in those. They were actually, I want to say, small elevator compartments.
Okay, good. All right, so we're in the home stretch. You mentioned the sister company, the Fruit Grower Supply, which was on the 7th floor of the Sunkist Building. You're going to need to give us a little backstory to this sister company, because it's interesting, and I want you to.
Well, in the San Francisco earthquake in 1906 basically caused a great rush on the timber in Northern California to rebuild the city of San Francisco, and at that time Sunkist was using shook, which is basically wood, from that same area to put oranges and lemons in cartons and to ship. So there became a shortage of lumber for both San Francisco, I'm sure, and for Sunkist. So the board of directors developed a sister company with the sole purpose of trying to secure timber for the production of, the cartons at that time, which were basically wood. And so they did that and started buying lumber property up in Northern California, and it's since moved to Oregon and has been a very successful venture. And to this day, they still provide cartons to the Sunkist packing houses for the all the way from the consumer carton that's used at Costco to fruit that's delivered to Korea. So, all
right, you did it. You're done.
Is that it?
You did it, man. I know you were a little anxious. You did it. We're going to wrap this up. We're going to do a proper goodbye. So, in the course of our talking for the last 10 minutes or so, has anything come up that you've wanted to say that I haven't given you a chance to say? Anything you're forgetting? Just one last memory of this great old building?
Well, the elevators were important, but the stairways were interesting. To rush up and down the building. Us young folks used them quite a bit. But in my experience of working downtown was opened up a lot of history to me, and being close to our law offices that supported our company, walking over to closer to the downtown by Pershing Square and that kind of thing. The opportunity to be down by the jewelry district in those days was an expensive venture for me, but. Yeah.
So you liked working downtown?
I loved the downtown area. I've always enjoyed my experience down there, and And I can see why now today that the younger generation is moving back into the city, so to speak, to be closer to where the action is.
Bill, thank you so much. We'll find another topic and have you back.
Okay. You're welcome. Have a good day.
My name is Erin Geddes, and I'm here in Riverside City Hall, and you're listening to You Can't Eat the Sunshine.
Donald, I'm here with you. We're downtown, and I want you to properly introduce yourself, and we can jump into a history of the Los Angeles Central Public Library between in the late 1970s to the early 1990s.
Okay. I'm Don Spivack. I'm formerly the Deputy Chief of Operations for the Los Angeles Community Redevelopment Agency, now semi-retired and doing consulting work on environmental justice and other nonprofit activities. But some history on the library. The library, of course, was built in the 1920s and became obsolete over the course of several years. In the 1970s, the city began looking at a plan to replace the library. The original thought was really twofold. One, to vacate the site that the library sat on, because
the site of the library is
at the south side of 5th Street between Grand Avenue and Flower Street, which is across to the east of the Arco Plaza, which had been completed in the early 1970s, and it took an entire city block and filled it with 2 million square foot office buildings. So the city saw the opportunity to, in effect, create another such complex on the library site, which obviously meant relocating the library. So the second prong was to build a new library on Broadway to spearhead the revitalization of Broadway. And so the idea was close the library, build a new facility, given that the library on 5th Street was an obsolete building. Although it turned out that many people in the city loved the building, and so there was a lot of resistance to the idea of tearing it down. Subsequently, the thought came up of building a new library on a portion of the site, using the portion of the site that is east of the historic building, which did require removing the children's wing and reconstructing it as part of the reconstruction. But going back to the original thought, there was capacity on the library site for about 2 million square feet of development, roughly the same amount as was at Arco. And the library itself was going to use about 360,000 feet, which meant the city had available that additional square footage. The plan was put together, which involved the city, the library, the redevelopment agency, and the chair of Arco, who was advocating for significant improvements to the library building, envisioned taking that development capacity and moving it elsewhere in downtown. And that brought in Rob McGuire Thomas Partners, who then expressed a willingness to build 2 office buildings on the north side of 5th Street that would purchase that density, and in addition to purchasing the density, would also guarantee that the buildings would start paying property taxes as of a date certain, finished or not, so that the redevelopment agency could issue bonds for the construction of the new library. And in essence, the sale of the air rights, some private contributions in the form of public improvements that were to be privately financed, including the Bunker Hill Steps and the plaza behind the library, which brought in a 3rd office building as part of the total complex at 550 South Hope Street, provided the bulk of the financing for constructing the new library. While the plan was being formulated, there was unfortunately a devastating fire that took place in the library. Many people think the fire was the driving force behind the reconstruction. The plan for the reconstruction was already underway. But the fire did accelerate the need to move forward with building the new library. The new library was constructed. It is a building that substantially increased the amount of the collection that is in open stacks available to the public, whereas in the old library, the majority of the collection was not available to the public. And when it opened with improvements that included completely digitizing the entire catalog system, connecting all of the branch libraries in the city to a single system so that the entire library system was integrated, took back the lawn at the main entrance to the library that had become a parking lot. It was the first instance of taking a parking lot and actually converting it back to a park, which triggered another acquisition. The redevelopment agency bought a garage at 4th and Olive Streets for the city so the employees could have a place to park. So that was another piece of the total project. But the entire library project was finished in the early 1990s, opened, and has become a very important family attraction in downtown and helped to spur a lot of the revitalization that followed.
Perfect. We've covered a lot of ground very quickly because you're very smart, and this is second nature to you. I want to just take a couple steps back and fill in some blanks for people because I think this is super important. Sure. Let's start with Arco Towers. Do you want to give us just a quick? The Arco Towers were this giant development that took out several buildings. Okay.
Yes, Arco Towers took out a fair amount of older buildings, including the historic Arco Richfield, Atlantic Richfield.
The Richfield
building that had stood on the site. It was a very marvelous piece of architecture. It was one of the best examples of architecture in the city, and it was demolished. And the entire block was cleared, and in the international style, which is the architectural style that was used for the Arco Plaza, 2 sleek black high-rise buildings on a fairly large plaza were built in its place. And that was completed in about 1973. It also included an underground parking and shopping center that, for a whole host of reasons, was not terribly successful, primarily because it was a dead end. You couldn't get from there through it and go somewhere else. You went into it if you wanted to go into it, and then you had to come back out again. So it was not something that encouraged through movement. They looked at a lot of examples when they thought of doing it, and virtually all of the examples they looked at connected to something like a transit station, which this obviously didn't. And that was the reason why it was not very successful.
Perfect. Okay, just a couple loose spots to fill in. You mentioned 505 South Hope. I think I got the address right. 550 South Hope. Now that was the site of the Church of the Open Door, and there was, if you could maybe just spend a minute bringing us up on the backstory around this 1912 4,000-seat church, which was in terrible, suffered some terrible seismic damage, and was a bit of a I think everyone will be interested to just get us to speed on the redevelopment of that plot.
That site, as you mentioned, was occupied by a very large evangelical church, and it came out of the evangelical movement of the early part of the early 1900s, the early part of the 20th century. The building was seriously damaged in the 1987 earthquake, and the original owners of it, realizing that it was damaged, were interested in moving out of it. In the interim, though, while they were planning their move, another evangelical moved in and bought the building and said that the building is not seriously damaged, we can reopen. And the city said, no, you're red tagged, you're not going to reopen. And argued back and forth a bit and prevailed, and the building was closed. The pastor of the church subsequently moved the church into rented space on Broadway, in a former theater on Broadway. But the building was remarkable for having a neon sign on top that said "Jesus Saves," and he did work a deal to take that sign and put it on top of the building where he moved the church.
And this neon sign still exists. One of them is still on the theater on Broadway.
Yes, the neon sign still exists. The church was then demolished. The site was then incorporated into the library project and became a third office building that contributed to the financing of the overall library project.
Perfect. Okay, one last thing, and this is really important. And you mentioned it in passing, but it's really, I think, in my discussions with city planners, this is a really powerful tool in that has been used downtown, and they look forward to using in the future. Do you want to talk about air rights transfer, which I think you mentioned quickly because you understand it, but not everyone does, and I think it's pretty important.
Air rights transfer is a provision of the city code that allows buildable capacity to be moved among sites. The Central City Community Plan, which is where the library and virtually all the other projects that have made use of this mechanism is located, says that overall the development in downtown cannot exceed an average of 6 times the square footage of the sum of all the sites, although any individual site can be developed up to 13 times. So what they refer to as the floor area ratio is the ratio of building to lot. So a floor area ratio of 13 to 1 is a building that has 13 times the number of square feet as the lot it sits on. However, the only way you can get to 13 to go above the nominal 6 is by buying unused density from another site, transferring those floor area rights to another location. And that is managed by the city. The city encourages moving the density to sites that are close to major transit facilities and taking the density from sites that are historically significant. The library is a historically significant property, had the capacity, as I mentioned earlier, for a total of 2 million square feet of development on the parcel, given its size. And the original library at 160,000 feet and the expansion adding 200,000 feet, total of 360,000, left well over 1.5 million square feet of capacity that could be moved elsewhere. The bulk of it was simply moved across the street to the library tower, now the U.S. Bank Tower, and most of the rest to what became the Southern California Gas Company Tower, diagonally to the northeast, and a small portion went to the 550 South Hope site. So all of the density was distributed from the library site to those 3 sites. Now there's one other factor, is that under the city code, no individual lot can get more than 13 to 1. And the parcel on which the bank tower, the 73-story U.S. Bank Tower, sits on its own is greater than 13 to 1. So the city adopted a separate ordinance where they took all of the affected properties, combined them, declared them one parcel, and in essence averaged the density of 5 buildings, the library, the One Bunker Hill building, the library tower, the gas company, and the 550 Hope building.
Interesting.
To allow the tower to be built at its scale on the defined lot that it sits on.
Fantastic. You did it, Donald. It's a great building, and that's a great backstory, and I thank you as always for your insights.
My pleasure.
Hi, my name is Philip Mershon. I'm here in the fabulous Victor's Restaurant, Hollywood, California, and you're listening to You Can't Eat the Sunshine.
And we're done. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to our podcast for the week of February 16th, 2015. Our podcast is called You Can't Eat the Sunshine. And I mean that. Kim, I want to thank you for participating as always. I know you always enjoy our interviews. This week we had interviews with Bill Martinet, a longtime Sunkist employee, talking about his 1 year at the 1935 Walker and Eisen Sunkist Building on West 5th Street across from the Central Library. Our other guest today was Donald Spivack, former Deputy Chief of Operations and Policy for the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles, talking about the Los Angeles Central Library's the events impacting the library between 1982 and 1992. A crucial 10-year period in the library's life. Kim, we like feedback. Tell us how people can give us feedback. We got such a nice email last week from Bernice.
I know. It's nice to get feedback. We actually have an email account associated with this podcast. You can't eat the sunshine at gmail.com, or you can just go through the contact link at www.esotouric.com. You can, if you're so inclined, come and see us on an Esotouric bus adventure. You always will. Those are our tours. You can also come to one of the Lava events that we host, like the Lava Sunday Salon or the Forensic Science Seminar at Cal State Los Angeles. It's always a hoot to hear from podcast listeners in real life, and we do. If you're so inclined and you're listening on a device, a pod reader, a podcaster, as it were, you can give us some feedback there, as in, for example, on iTunes or Stitcher or those other places where you can find the show. And, did you know, Richard, I'm auto-streaming on our YouTube channel now. So if you want to listen in the background on YouTube, you can do that too. The issue with our FeedBurner feed going down in the iTunes account, suddenly losing all the episodes, I decided to be a little redundant. So, very redundant. You'll find the podcast everywhere.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that, Kim. Thank you.
No problem. Pass it on.
Okay, so Kim, we're now. I have something I wanted to say that I didn't say in the introduction.
Oh my goodness, what is it?
So it's about the Sunkist Building. So everything's fine. Sunkist Building is 35. Robert Field is the chief designer for Walker and Eisen for the Sunkist Building. This building's design is informed by Field's work in Parkinson's office. Field worked on the Oviatt Building. Oviatt Building, of course, was really the famous Art Deco parts are not Robert Field, but he worked on that. He did go and work on Bullock's Wilshire for Parkinson, and Parkinson was then involved in City Hall. So the Sunkist Building is very much a natural progression out of City Hall. Lower courses are limestone, upper courses are terracotta, architectural terracotta, and the Sunkist Building really is just this boiled down brutalist masterpiece about 30 years before brutalism. So just everyone can think about that, and I'm sorry, I'm relieved that I mentioned Robert Field's name before the podcast is over. So there we go. So Kim, we've got some upcoming bus tours as always, because we're always on the bus. Take it away.
I'm delighted to. We're wrapping up the month of February with our first in a series of crime bus tours. Those are my babies, and the first one on February 28th is Wild Wild West Side, a tour about cults, acid freakouts, child abuse, mysterious priestesses carried willy-nilly, not by benefit of their own 2 feet, and of course a cemetery visit. It is a hoot. We would love to see you on the bus. On March the 7th, it's Weird West Adams. And for that tour, we'll be exploring some of those cool early suburbs that got severed from the rest of the city by the 10 freeway, but are still so packed with culture and criminal lore. And also some pretty interesting stuff about housing covenants and social justice activism right here in Los Angeles. We're in Pasadena on March the 21st with March the 21st with Pasadena Confidential with Crimebo the Clown, a tour featuring rocket science, black magic, presidential assassins, independent film stars, and suicides. Boy, more than you can count. That's Pasadena Confidential with Crimebo the Clown. He's not a clown. He's like a painted hobo. If you're scared of clowns, you can still get on this bus. If you're not scared of clowns, you have no reason not to get on this bus. So we'll see you there. March 28th. I have some more writing to do, honey. I'm launching a new crime bus tour. It's in collaboration with Richard here, who you've been listening to for some time now here on the podcast. So you know, I'm bringing the crime, he's bringing the architecture, and we're going to show you some fascinating corners of Hollywood where the history survives despite all the redevelopment going on out there. We've lost some stuff in Hollywood. In fact, we're losing things as I speak to you right now, Villa Carlotta. But it's going to be a really fun tour. I found some terrifically deranged cases to share, and including some where I'm doing research that no one else can do, because I'm talking to living people who've talked to criminals. Yes. Exciting things that you learn when you're the Esotouric people, and people come to you to share these extraordinary stories. I promise you, though, you do not want to miss Hollywood, particularly because of the Capitol Records carpool killing. A really amazing case, and I'm enjoying digging into that one very, very much. Okay, that brings us to April, and Hotel Horrors and Main Street Vice, our downtown double feature, a tour which includes visits to some beautiful early 20th century hotel interiors where some god-awful stuff happened, and trips up and down, hither and yon, exploring offbeat lore from the old downtown. Not the redeveloped downtown, the downtown when you could see a real mummified human being on display as part of a wax museum, where you could go to a freak show, where you could pick up a B-girl. Oh, wait! In the LA Times last week, a Koreatown bar owner's attorney actually said B-girls, and he called them by name. B-girls are cultural expectations in Koreatown. So B-girls have never gone away. They just moved a little bit to the west, and good for them.
What happened, Kim, is the city attorney's office decided to selectively prosecute female employees in bars in the early 60s, which brought an end to the syndicate running B-girls. And now the city attorney's office is faced with the exact same problem. So someone should go to the city archive and pull out all the records and figure out what they did last time. Because it always makes me sad when city prosecutors reinvent the wheel.
Indeed. And what happened last week is that a karaoke bar lost its liquor license because the women there are paid to hang out and drink with customers. And apparently that's the case in all those bars. I wouldn't know. They're not very welcoming. Speaking of which, Hank's shut down. Hank's, some people were saying, it was the last, dive bar in downtown. Not very welcoming. I went in with you once, Richard. You went in a couple times without me and with my sister, and in every case, the regulars were so unpleasant. Not exactly cheers, but they're gone. Still, the loss of any dive bar diminishes me, so R.I.P. Hanks. What are we up to? Oh, the Real Black Dahlia, April the 18th, our most popular crime bus tour. And yes, it's filling up. It always does, kids. So if you've been wanting to take the Dahlia, as they say, you might want to book your ticket for April 18th on the Real Black Dahlia. On the 25th, we're we're returning to another of our new crime bus tours, which we've given once before. It's called Echo Park Book of the Dead. It's got some really deranged crimes and a tour, very in-depth tour of Sister Amy Semple McPherson's extraordinary house on the lake, which does have the most beautiful tiled bathroom that you can publicly visit in Los Angeles. Also, I will simply mention sometime later in the month of May, we will be having our once-a-year Tom Waits bus adventure with my May 16th, thank you. Just a couple weeks after this, with my dear compadre David Smay as host and me as co-host. And if you dig Tom Waits, get on the bus and pass it on. Thanks.
Okay, Kim, thank you for bringing us home. I think Slats and Numa want their lunch, so we're going to have to go. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to encourage you to continue to listen, and I want to remind you,
you can't eat the sunshine.
You can't eat the sunshine, but you can make a beeline for the best of the coastline. La 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 la. Skid Row, Solano Canyon, the Doria, and Pico Union, the long-lost neighborhood called Hermina, between South Pass and Highland Park, Grand Central Park. It is divine. You can't eat the sunshine, but it's a gold mine.